Aloha. I'm Sabrina with Begin Being, the show dedicated to guiding you to being the best version of you, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically, with the ultimate goal to help you to remember who you are meant to be and why you are here. All right, in today's video, we're going to be discussing boundaries. Now, why boundaries? So I was actually talking with one of my friends about this the other day, and I was like, ooh, I think I should make a video on boundaries, because a lot of people are uncomfortable with setting them, uncomfortable with then, following through with them. So I decided that I'm going to make a video today about setting boundaries and like why you should and how to set them, and the number one thing people forget to do when they're setting their boundaries. Now, what exactly is a boundary? Like why boundaries, and what is it? Well, a boundary can be as simple as just saying no. So, for example, when I was at Huna, it's one of the live trainings that I do. At Huna, I was, talking with some friends and stuff, and one of my friends wanted to go shopping, and I really needed to get some work done. So I simply said no. Like, I can't right now. And so sometimes it's just as simple as that. You're just saying, hey, no, I can't go do this. And then sometimes it's a little bit more complicated. So I had a friend who we were dating in the past, and we were trying to stay friends during this event. And he has a bit of narcissistic tendencies. And I don't prefer to use labels, so I don't like to call someone a narcissist. And when it comes down to it, he has a lot of those tendencies. In NLP, Neurolinguistic programming, which is one of the trainings that I teach, we teach a thing that is people are not their behaviors. So what that means is basically, yes, maybe they're doing a behavior that's not appropriate, like lying, for example. And what can happen is that sometimes they get labeled as a liar. But ultimately, you can't change a person. What you can do is change the behavior that the person is doing. With a narcissist, it's generally they continue to do a behavior that is, for most people, considered inappropriate. And that was the behavior this particular person was doing. And he was continuously stepping over my boundaries. Now, another reason why I wanted to make this video was because honestly, boundaries is something I struggle with myself. It's something that I really have had to learn to do, and something that honestly I'm uncomfortable with doing, because I really just enjoy being nice. That's one of my values, to be kind and caring to people. That's something that means a lot to me. So that's kind of who I am. It's a part of who I am to be nice. And at a certain point, you have to take a step back, because if people are then taking advantage of that, not only is it not healthy for you, but it's not healthy for them, because then they're not learning their own lessons. And sometimes when you're being nice all of the time, you're not allowing that other person to go through lessons that they need to learn, which in the end actually isn't nice. So that's kind of what was happening with me and my friend. He was continuously running over my boundaries, and I was giving him another chance and another chance. And part of the reason why I was staying friends with this person is because when we first started dating, I made him a promise, because he had gone through some pretty awful stuff when he was younger, and there was a lot of issues. And being the kind, caring person that I am, I wanted him to see that not everyone is like the people he experienced in his past. Not everyone treats people like he was treated. And so I made him a promise. And there was a very simple, innocent promise at the time, which was, I will never abandon you. Because I made him that promise, though, I tried my best to stay friends with him and to, help him through what was going on. And when it came down to it, though, he kept pushing against my boundaries, and I kept giving him those chances. And finally I said, okay, you know what? If you're going to continue this behavior, if you're going to continue to do this, then I'm not going to be able to talk to you. And he continued the behavior, so I actually didn't talk to him for a whole year. And I was hoping that what would happen is we would stop the cycle that we were going through, and we would both learn lessons. I would learn my lessons of needing to be able to set boundaries, and hopefully he would learn his lessons of what is okay, like how treating people is okay and what's not okay when you're in a relationship, whether that's romantic, friendship, family, co-workers, anything like that. There are certain things that are okay, and there are certain things that are not okay. And setting your boundaries with other people allows them to know what's okay with you and what's not okay with you. So with him, it was a little more complicated than just a simple, no, I don't want to go shopping right now, or I can't go shopping right now. For him, it was a little bit more complicated. For him, it was explaining, listen, here's what's happening right now. It's not okay, this is a boundary of mine, and going into a little bit more detail. So depending on the situation, depending on your relationship with the person and what's happening right then in that moment and how understanding they are, you can be as simple or you can get a little bit more detailed as what's comfortable for you. Ultimately, it's your boundary. So again, you can just simply say no. And ultimately, what boundaries does is it allows us to know ourselves. It allows us to know who we are. So setting boundaries does 4 key things. Number 1, it sets up success for you. So you begin to know yourself. You begin to know, hey, this is acceptable. This is not acceptable. You begin to be more clear with yourself. You begin to know what you value, what you want in life. So that way, like if you do encounter maybe a narcissistic person or someone who's just, running over your boundaries for whatever reason, possibly not even meaning to, you can be clear with them and say, this is my boundary. This is okay. This is not okay. And by knowing what your boundaries are, then you're more able to be successful in your relationships. Number 2, it sets up success with others. So many people avoid setting boundaries because they think that it might cause like a conflict. They're afraid to set that boundary. When in reality though, if you set up boundaries ahead of time, or if an event happens and you're like, ooh, okay, this is actually a boundary, this is not okay, and here's why, then the other person's able to then respond next time with a different choice, like with a different response. And then they're able to choose. It gives them the choice, it gives the choice back to them, because then they're able to choose whether or not they want to take that action. If they don't know about your boundary, then they have no idea that they might be running over it. So it actually sets up success with others as well. And by doing so, it avoids future conflicts. Number 3, it protects us. So setting boundaries actually protects us. Some people, again, they have that fear of setting boundaries because they think that maybe it's not safe, because they think maybe there might be like a conflict and they don't want to have a conflict with the other person. Well, what can happen though is if you don't set that boundary, then unknowingly sometimes, because you've never told them, someone can just continuously run over your boundary, and that can actually cause resentment within you. However, once again, if you're not speaking up for yourself, you're not allowing them, you're not giving them that chance to maybe do something else. So it can protect you. Now, the 4th thing it can do is it also protects others. So again, if you're not setting that boundary and perhaps they're running over it constantly, and you're building like this resentment, you're building all of this stuff up inside of you, you can just sometimes accidentally explode on a person. You might not even mean to, but sometimes when we have stuff like built up in us so much, like it becomes so much that boom, now we're yelling at them and they're like, whoa, where did this come from? Like, why are you yelling at me right now? Well, it's actually because they did something that has been bothering you. So setting that boundary actually helps protect them as well. And it gives them a chance to go by your wishes. So it gives them a chance to be able to show you, hey, I do respect you and I respect your boundaries, and I'm going to respect your wish to stay like doing some work instead of going shopping. So for example, the particular friend that I was talking about with the shopping, I just simply said no. And me and that friend, we have a really good, tight relationship. And so she was just like, oh yeah, sure, absolutely. I understand that you have to work. We can do it some other time. And we did. So you give them that opportunity to be able to be like, oh, hey, this is something, said no. All right, let's go ahead and go on and continue on with something else. So it helps them as well. All right. We're about to talk about how to set boundaries with love, and the number one thing that people forget to do when they're setting boundaries, or perhaps don't do it because it's uncomfortable. But first, if you're already getting value out of this video, please go ahead and hit the like button, hit subscribe, and the notification button. That really helps me, especially as a new YouTube channel at this time. So there's my energy exchange piece. All right, now let's get into it. Okay, so there's a difference between just setting a boundary and being like, bam, here's my boundary, and setting a boundary with love. And what I'm going to teach you is more of the style of setting boundaries with love. And there's many reasons for that, but basically it's, if you set a boundary with love, then you're more likely to get that boundary, like to get the person to be able to be like, oh yeah, okay, I really appreciate this boundary. Thank you for sharing it with me. And that leads us into step number one. When setting boundaries, the first thing that you want to do is be free of negative emotions. So for example, if somebody just ran over your boundary and you're like really angry at them, maybe they didn't even mean to, but you're still just angry, or you're like pissed off that they did whatever it was that they did. If you go into the conversation to set the boundary in anger, what do you think you're going to get back? More of the same, right? You'll get that anger back at you, because here's the thing, if you push, you're going to get pushed back. So what you want to do is be able to be free of your emotions, of negative, like, hyper, like, ooh, I'm angry, or maybe you're sad. So maybe they hurt your feelings. Maybe they said something or did something and it really hurt your feelings. And so you're going into it with emotions of sadness. If you go into it with those kind of emotions, that's what you're going to put into the conversation. So first, go ahead and let go of those negative emotions and be calm, cool, centered, and relaxed when you're setting the boundary. Now, how do you do that? Well, there are many ways. One of the ways which I teach is an ancient Hawaiian forgiveness process called Ho'oponopono. And what it does, it basically takes you through a process of forgiveness. So, say someone comes along, they slam against your boundary, you're pissed, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're whatever's going on and coming up for you. Well, you can do Ho'oponopono. I have a video on it. You can watch it in the link below. There's a free meditation included with the video. So go do Ho'oponopono with the person. Again, it's just an ancient Hawaiian forgiveness process. And then when you come out of the meditation, you have that peace. You are what's called pono, which is a Hawaiian word for meaning right. Not like right versus wrong, but smooth and calm and at peace within yourself. You are pono, you are right with the world and yourself and the other person. So step number one, just to make sure that you do not have any negative emotions going into that conversation. Number two, be clear on what is okay and what is not okay for you, and refrain from wavering. So yes, sometimes you can just simply say no. And if it's a little bit more of a complicated situation, you might need to give somewhat of an explanation. So I'll give two examples of ways to look at this. So let's say for one, like the first example, you are getting into a new relationship and things are going well and you really like each other, you have a lot in common and stuff. And then at a certain point, the other person says, hey, what would be fun? Like, what if we're in an open relationship? and you're like, ooh, yeah, so that's not going to work for me. I'm not into that. And what can happen sometimes is that some people, sometimes they'll like give you a little bit of pushback, even if you are going into it, you know, with that calm, cool, collected space, because sometimes they just want to like test the boundary, and other times they have their own stuff that they want to add in. So sometimes when we set boundaries, people want to like compromise, or sometimes they want to add in their own stuff, like what they want, or sometimes they want to try and talk you out of it. So say in the example of the open relationship person, maybe you set that boundary with them and you're like, okay, I want to be very clear with you. This is not something that I'm into. I like one-on-one deep relationships. And maybe that person comes back and says like, oh, okay, well, what if we have like sort of like a one-on-one deep open relationship, but it's like with 3 people? Like, what is that, like a throuple or something? Like, what if it's with 3 people? We can still have that deep intimate relationship, but you know, there's maybe like another person involved. And so now they're trying to compromise with you. Now they're trying to be like, hey, this is what they want and this is what you want. Now, the thing is, again, is to be very clear, because if you say like, okay, well, maybe we can try it, and that's not what you really want, the relationship's not going to go well. So again, sometimes people are a little bit afraid to put those boundaries out there because they're like, oh man, okay, well, if I tell them like I'm not into this, then maybe they're going to want to be out of the relationship, and I really like this person. I don't want them to be out of the relationship. But here's the thing. If that's truly a boundary for you and you have zero interest in trying something like that, it's better to go ahead and set the boundary now than months down the road. Now you're more attached to the person. Now maybe you've even fallen completely in love with the person, and you are not happy with the 3 people being in there, with like that person trying to get a third or whatever is going on. Then it's not going to work in the long run anyway. So that's the part of don't waver. Like, be very clear on it and refrain from wavering. Now, another example is, say like timeliness is extremely important to you. Like, you really value people being on time. You want to be on time yourself, and it's important to you that others are on time as well. Now, say you're with someone and timeliness is not their thing. They could care less. They have a value of just kind of going with the flow and, you know, doing like what they're wanting to do in the moment. And they do not have a value of time, and they don't really like paying attention to time. Like, you guys ever meet that person who has like no idea what time it is? So say you're a person who, like, if you're 5 minutes early, you're late, and you get together with a person who is like, I'll get there when I get there. And you are like, okay, this is driving me crazy. This person, like, they just can't ever be ready. We're always late, and it's bothering you, right? So it's a boundary. So what you can do is you can tell them, be very clear what, you know, how it makes you feel to be late, but be very clear on, you know, that boundary of being on time. Now, in this scenario, perhaps the other person, that's when you find out they don't care about time. That's when they come back and they tell you like, oh wow, like, please forgive me. I didn't realize I was running over your boundary like that. I didn't realize how important time was to you. And here's the thing. I really don't care. Like, I do not like paying attention to time, and I love you, I respect you, whatever that relationship is. And maybe they come back with, hey, I'll tell you what, I want to be able to do this for you. So how about you kind of remind me of the time, let me know, hey, we're gonna have to leave at this time, and you know, we have 10 minutes, or you know, something like that. Like, they give you something to remind them of. And maybe you don't really want that. Like, you don't really want to sit there and be like, okay, time's up. Like, where are you? What are you doing? Maybe you don't want to do that. And here's the thing though, that might be a time when it's okay to go ahead and have a compromise, because you value timeliness and the other person values not paying attention to the time. So you guys can meet in the middle, and as long as, again, they're respecting that boundary. So if you then go on to tell them, that, hey, we're about to leave, like it's time, like are you ready yet? And then they still are late, then that becomes an issue, and that's where you need to not waver. But in a case like that, of course, be flexible with what is happening, because the other person might have a boundary as well. Step 3, set consequences. This is the number one most forgotten thing to do in boundary setting. Most of the time people will go through and they say, oh, here's my boundary, like I really want you to be on time. And that's it. They don't set consequences. Well, then what happens is, say, future, and you're like, oh, hey, you're reminding them you're doing what they want. Oh, hey, we got like 10 minutes, make sure you're ready, etc. And then 15 minutes later, they're still not ready. Well, if you've never set a consequence, then it's like, oh, okay, shoot, well, now what do I do? However, if you've set a consequence of, look, if you're not ready, I really value being on time. So if you're not ready, I'm just gonna leave you here. Maybe that's too harsh, I don't know. You figure out what's right for you, and you figure out what the consequence needs to be. Maybe that's not harsh enough. The thing is that if you tell them ahead of time, if you tell them up front, here's the boundary and here's the consequences if you run over that boundary, then if they run over that boundary, they are willingly choosing the consequences. So if you let them know, okay, hey, I really want you to be ready to go by 6 p.m. And then, at 5:30, you're like, hey, 30 minutes, just letting you know. 5:40, 20 minutes, just letting you know. 5:50, hey, it's 10 minutes. And then it's like 6:10 and they're still not ready, just leave. Now, sometimes that's also the most uncomfortable, is step number 4, enacting the consequences. So here's the thing, if you set the consequences, which you absolutely must do, setting consequences is absolutely vital to setting boundaries, because if you don't set the consequences, then you're really just not saying much. You're saying, here's what I want, and hopefully you'll do it. But you're not really able to enforce that boundary if you don't let them know the consequences, or the consequences can seem unreasonable. So let's say you say you're gonna do the time thing. So you're like, okay, hey, it's 5:30, blah, blah, blah. You keep telling them. And then here comes 6:10 and you just leave without telling them. What do you think is going to happen? Like, they're going to probably, possibly blow up at you, or they're going to be really hurt. And that's not going to help the situation at all. Yes, technically they went over your boundary, and maybe what you do could be too extreme if you don't let them know ahead of time. So setting the consequence is absolutely vital, a vital part, a vital step in setting your boundaries. Now again, step number 4, enacting the consequences, that's where it can be very difficult. Especially if you are like me and you don't want to hurt other people's feelings. Like you want them to be okay too. And when I gave you that situation where I was trying to still be friends with my ex and he was running over my boundaries. And this was a very big lesson for me. I'm able to set boundaries in certain parts of my life, and other parts of my life it's harder. And this was a good lesson for me for me, I have to set boundaries in all parts of my life, because where you do one thing in one part of your life is how you show up in other parts of your life as well. So before or during the boundary setting process, I was like, okay, look, you've continuously been running over my boundaries, the ones that I've set in the past. And here's the thing, this is serious to me. This is not okay. It's not appropriate. It's not okay to treat people like this. If you continue to do these patterns of behavior, then there's going to be a consequence. And that consequence is we can no longer be friends. That consequence is I'm going to cut off communication. So Step number 4, I had to enact the consequence when he continued to step over my boundaries. And he continued to treat not only me, but others around me in a way that was completely inappropriate. And so I had to tell him, I'm cutting off all communication with you for a year. I made you a promise that I wouldn't abandon you, so I'm setting the boundary at a year, and I set the consequence at a year, and you stepped over that boundary. And so here we are. And it's I can tell you, it's not necessarily easy. There were phone calls, there were text messages, there were social media chats, and I had to block. That's setting the consequence. I'm in no way saying it's fun. I'm in no way saying that, sometimes it's easy, because sometimes it's not. However, if you don't do it, what happens is your word becomes worthless. Your word no longer has meaning, because you are not valuing yourself. That person's not going to respect you. You're not going to respect yourself. And then, like I said, your word loses all value, it loses all meaning, it loses all power. And interestingly enough, it's not just toward the negative. So it's not just like, oh, okay, well, if I don't follow through with my word right now, he's not going to believe me the next boundary I set. It's not just to that level, it's to a whole different level of people no longer believe you even when you're saying good, happy things. So for example, if you are in a relationship and you're still in that relationship and you are not following through on your word, the next time you say I love you, they're not going to feel it as much. The next time you say like, oh wow, you look really handsome today, or wow, that was an amazing thing you did, in the back of their mind, in their unconscious, they're not going to truly believe you. There's going to be this little thing back in there saying, I don't really know, like her word doesn't really mean as much. So that's what can happen if you set the boundary and set the consequence and then don't follow through, don't enact the consequence. So steps number 3 and 4 are the two most very important, absolutely you have to do them, part of boundary setting. And unfortunately, most people either don't realize they're supposed to set a consequence, they forget to set the consequence, or they do, and even worse, they don't follow through with the consequence. And here's the other side of it. When you do set boundaries and you do set the consequences and then enact them, people actually respect you more. So a lot of people, the reason why they're not doing all of these steps is because they're afraid, they're worried. They think, I don't know if I feel safe doing this. I don't know like how they're going to react, and I don't know if this is something that I should really do or not. The thing is though, if you do, it turns out that people actually respect you more because you're valuing yourself. And as you value yourself, others value you. Think about it this way. If you don't have any boundaries, like if you don't think that you have any boundaries, then you're not actually valuing yourself. And if you don't value yourself, how is that projected out toward others? They're not going to value you. So if you can't value yourself, how can you ever expect anyone else to value you? Just think about that the next time you think, I'm not sure if I want to set a boundary. Oh, I missed the farmer's market on Saturday. The things you think of in the middle of a video. Okay. Women, we're multitaskers. What can I say? At least it wasn't during. Okay, no, we are not putting that in the bloopers. How long have you been off? Hello? Oh, technology. We're doing good.